17 years ago, my father slammed the door in my face and told me I wasn't his daughter anymore. That was the last night I slept under his roof. My name is Eleanor Harrow, and ever since that moment, every choice I've made has carried the weight of his rejection. Tonight, at my brother's wedding, he leaned over 2 rows ahead, smirked, and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "If it weren't for pity, no one would have invited you." The vineyard glowed with strings of fairy lights woven through the trellises, laughter carrying on the evening breeze, the soft hum of a string quartet rising above the clink of champagne glasses. I slid into my seat, the wood chair cool beneath me, and there he was, 2 rows ahead, my father, Earl Harrow. Even at his age, he sat ramrod straight, shoulders squared like he was still measuring walls at a job site, the silver in his hair dulled by what looked like a permanent layer of construction dust. He turned just enough for his words to reach me, his mouth curling into a familiar sneer. "If it weren't for Jake," he said low, each syllable cutting like steel, "no one would have invited you." The air thickened around me, though the rest of the guests carried on with easy chatter. I lifted my glass of Prosecco, watched the bubbles climb the sides, and pressed a smile to my lips. 17 years of silence swelled in my chest, pressing against my ribs, but I held it down. Tonight, I reminded myself, the truth would do the talking. And then, across the aisle, I caught the bride's gaze. Grace's eyes lingered on me, longer than politeness allowed, curious, searching, almost rehearsed. Something in her look tugged at an old memory I couldn't quite place. A memory that felt like smoke curling from a fire I thought I'd left behind. He slid a neat stack of sensible applications across the kitchen table. Accounting, business, management. Every field that built a life with predictable edges. I set one envelope down beside them, the paper heavy in my hand. AmeriCorps NCCC. "I want to join Community Wildfire Response," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'm heading to New Mexico for training." The chair scraped back. He didn't argue. He stood, walked to the door, and swung it open like a verdict. "If you want to take care of yourself," he said, each word clipped and cold. "Start now. Get out." Behind him, my mother's fingers trembled as she lifted my backpack. She tucked a small silver locket into the side pocket, her whisper barely a breath. "Don't look back because you're scared." I stepped past him into the dark, past the threshold that had always felt more like a checkpoint than a welcome. The door slammed behind me, a hard, hollow sound like a coffin lid finding its seal. Heat rose off Amarillo's asphalt, the night thick with the taste of dust, and as I walked, the red grit seemed to cling to my tongue. I didn't turn around. Fear pulls backward. I aimed forward. Taos was smoke before it was a town, air dense and metallic, flames licking at the edges of timber like a warning. On my first assignment, I moved too far, too fast, and the wind flipped mean. Heat swelled behind me. The world narrowed to orange. A hand seized my line and yanked hard. Chief Dana Kovac's face cut through the haze. "Don't die to prove a point," she snapped. "Live to lead." That sentence burned in deeper than any ember. I pivoted. While others swung Pulaskis, I learned the veins of a fire, the topography, the wind, the fuel, and the language of ICS. Nights bled into mornings at a folding table. Me with a grease pencil over maps, drafting divisions and contingency lines while the radio crackled like dry grass. When fatigue clawed at me, I dropped to the floor for push-ups in the dark supply room, the concrete cool under my palms. His voice would rise from some stubborn place in memory. "You'll fail," and I'd count past it, jaw tight, answering only in breath. Watch me hold. Weeks later, during a shelter operation at Espanola High School, the power blew and the gym fell into a velvet black. A young nurse's voice cut through the din. "I need help. Now." And muscle memory took the lead. We worked by phone flashlights and feel the sharp tang of alcohol in the air. the chorus of storm and human fear rising and falling until a raw, hoarse newborn cry split the dark. We swaddled the little body with donated blankets. In the scramble, I never saw the nurse's face clearly, just a steady pair of hands and a thank you lost in the noise. Then the lights flickered back, and the line of the job carried us onward. Paper lanterns bobbed over the Santa Fe Plaza, smoke from the grills drifting between long tables dressed in white. Cousins traded jokes, aunties compared centerpieces, and the quartet slid into an easy standard. Then my father rose with his glass. He praised Jake, the pride of this family, and pivoted toward me without saying my name. And her? He smiled like a knife. She ran off chasing thrill jobs and abandoned her mother when she was sick. That's the truth. My fingers curled under the tablecloth, nails biting my palm. I could have stood and burned it all down. I didn't. This was Jake's night. The owner of the vineyard, proud and oblivious, led a small group toward a framed display near the bar. Murmurs rose, a wall honoring wildfire responders who'd supported the valley. My name hung there in block letters. Heads turned, a few guests clapped, unsure. My father chuckled into his glass. A plaque doesn't pay the bills. When he lifted a hand to smooth his hair, a flash of silver caught the lantern light. A locket, oval, familiar, impossible. The same one pressed into my backpack the night I left. It sat at his throat like a prize he'd won. My breath hitched so hard it hurt. Jake dropped his gaze to his plate. Grace slid her hand across the linen and tapped my wrist, a barely there touch that said not now. Please don't. The way she did it felt practiced, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with romance, more like someone who had learned where a pulse races when you're about to break. I held still and swallowed the heat back down. Back in the hotel room, I pulled the old field phone from my duffel, the one I take on backcountry deployments, and scrolled through a graveyard of missed calls. A single unheard voicemail blinked. Dated 8 years ago. I pressed play. If you're the one who helped me last night, thank you. The baby's okay. A pause, a rush of air. Gee, Moreno. The room tilted. The blackout gym at Espanola surged up. The smell of alcohol swabs. The glare of phone flashlights. A slippery cry tearing through the dark. A nurse's steady hands working beside mine. I'd never seen her face. I hadn't needed to. Morning cracked open with the sound of housekeeping carts down the hall. Jake knocked once and stepped in, tie loose, eyes tired. I should have told you sooner, he said. Grace was Mom's hospice nurse in Denver. Mom gave her a letter for you, to deliver when it was right. Something fragile in me trembled and then steadied, like a line going taut. For years I'd carried his version, abandonment as fact. Now there was a message threaded through time, waiting for me, held by the woman marrying my brother. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, but the story inside them began to change shape. By morning, the vineyard was picture perfect, strings tuned, cameras clicking, until the wind swung north and the faint bite of smoke threaded the air. Lights along the lawn hiccuped. The MC stalled with a joke that didn't land. Instinct kicked in. I slipped a handheld radio from my bag, scanned emergency channels, and mapped a quiet contingency in my head. Assembly points. A soft evac if the haze thickened. I stepped to the coordinator, kept my voice even, suggested we pre-stage ushers and mark a rally spot. A microphone crackled. Don't play incident commander here, my father said, smiling for the crowd. This is a wedding, not a fire. Heads turned, curious, irritated. I slid the radio back into my purse and let the moment pass. Grace wove through relatives toward me, eyes bright with urgency. Her mouth opened, then a cousin tugged her away for photos. She glanced back once, apology and resolve in the same look, and disappeared into the carousel of poses. Afternoon light filtered through the vines, a thin veil of smoke stroking the distant hills. When the fairy lights flickered again, the MC handed my father the mic. He raised his glass. My son made the right choices. He's the pride of this family. A pause. Deliberate. My daughter left home, left her mother when she was sick. That's the truth. Pain struck clean and fast. I rose without meaning to, but Jake's hand settled on my shoulder. Please, he whispered. Wait for Grace. I sat, pulse pounding. Across the aisle, my father's fingers pinched the silver locket at his throat like evidence, like ownership. Grace stepped forward, palm lifted to ask for the microphone. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. Before we dance, I have a promise to keep, for a mother. The plaza hushed, my father's brows knit. Jake stared at Grace. I didn't breathe. Every eye swung to the bride, waiting for whatever would turn the room. The vineyard fell silent, even the quartet holding their bows mid-air. Only the wind moved, stirring the fairy lights so they chimed faintly against one another. Grace stood at the center of it all, her lace skirt brushing the wooden floor, both hands wrapped around the microphone. They trembled for a heartbeat, then stilled as her voice cut through the hush. 7 years ago, she began, steady now. I was the hospice nurse for Teresa Harrow. My mother's name in her mouth froze the air. She gave me a letter and said, if the day ever comes when my son marries, stand and tell them this. My daughter never abandoned anyone. She stood in places no one else would. A ripple of whispers surged across the hall. Faces turned toward me, eyebrows arched, champagne flutes hovering halfway to lips. My breath caught, and heat pricked behind my eyes. Grace drew in a breath, her voice rising. And 8 years ago, during an evacuation at Espanola High School, when the power was out and fear was thick as smoke, it was you who helped my sister deliver her baby safely. That night, in the dark, you saved 2 lives. My family owes you more than we can ever repay. The murmur swelled into gasps, then stillness. She turned to me, her eyes bright and unwavering. Please stand so we can thank you. For a suspended moment, no one moved. Then a chair scraped against the floor, another followed, and another, until the sound became a wave. Guests rose one by one, skirts brushing, shoes scuffing, their applause hesitant at first, then rolling, growing, crashing like surf against the walls of the vineyard hall. I stayed seated, palms pressed to my thighs, heart racing out of rhythm. The noise poured over me, heavy, relentless. My father remained stone still, 2 rows ahead, his knuckles white around the silver locket, as if clinging to his version of truth. The ovation swelled louder, people craning for me, waiting. My chest tightened, a lifetime of silence pressing down, demanding release. Finally, I rose. My heels clicked against the wooden floorboards, the weight of 4 silver stars gleaming on my shoulders, catching the light. Gasps turned into shouts, claps broke into cheers. The sound shook the vines, shook the air, shook the ground itself. I did not bow. I did not wave. I stood, spine straight, head high, a soldier's nod, my only acknowledgement. The applause hit like thunder. The hall blurred, but one face stayed sharp, my father's. He alone stayed seated, jaw clenched, eyes hard, fingers strangling the locket at his chest. The world had stood. He had not. And that was the truth no silence could bury. The vineyard had emptied to shadows and scattered glassware. The last of the sparklers burned down to ash. I stepped aside beneath a string of darkened lights, the night air sharp with lingering smoke from the hills. Grace found me there, her veil tucked into one hand, her eyes steady despite the exhaustion written across her face. Without a word, she pressed an envelope into my palm. The paper was worn soft, edges yellowed from time, and my breath caught when I saw the handwriting, slanted, uneven, ink that had trembled its way across the page. My mother's voice leapt up from the strokes. If he never learns to stand, then you must. The words blurred as I blinked them back into focus. I could almost hear her in the hospice bed, whispering through pain, telling me not to bend, not to disappear. My hand shook, not from weakness, but from the weight of carrying her message 17 years too late. Jake approached then, tie loosened, jacket tossed over one shoulder. His face was pale, his jaw tight as if he'd swallowed down whole years of silence. He stopped a step away, eyes lowered. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for staying quiet all this time. Silence is its own kind of fear, but tonight I finally chose to stand." My throat closed, words clawing upward until they came out in a whisper. Standing is always harder than bowing. We stood there in the quiet, brother and sister, bound not by our father's approval, but by our shared guilt and the fragile choice of breaking it. Then footsteps approached, measured, uneven. My father stood in the glow of the last lanterns, stripped of his audience, stripped of the microphone. No applause to shield him now. His voice rasped like gravel dragged across concrete. I don't know how to stand." The admission fell heavy between us. For a long moment, none of us spoke. His chest rose with effort, his shoulders no longer squared like steel beams, but slumped beneath the years he'd carried like armor. I stepped forward until the space between us was only breath. My hand reached up, not gentle, but deliberate, and I unfastened the silver locket at his throat. The chain slipped loose, cold against my fingers. I held it in my palm, then pressed it back toward him. "Mom gave this to me the night you pushed me out," I said, my voice firm though it wavered around the edges. "She told me not to look back out of fear. I've carried it every step since. Tonight I return it, to the man who always needed to own everything. But the act of standing, that belongs to me, and me alone." His eyes shuddered. The locket lay heavy in his hand. No longer a prize, just a piece of metal carrying a truth he couldn't rewrite. His chin lowered, shoulders curling inward. In that moment, he was not the towering figure who had ruled our house, but an old man hunched beneath the weight of his choices. Breath shallow as though the air itself judged him. He didn't speak again. He didn't have to. The silence between us was no longer his weapon. It was the record of everything he'd failed to say. And for the first time, I wasn't crushed by it. I had written my own entry in that record, and it was this. I stood. 3 months later, the high desert air carried the sting of smoke again. I stood on the rise at the Wildland Firefighters Monument, granite walls etched with names gleaming in the noon sun. From here, I could see the valley spread below Santa Fe, dry brush already yellowing, another season of fire waiting just over the ridge. The mountains never asked for permission to burn. They just did. And still, we stood against them. Footsteps scraped over gravel behind me. When I turned, my father was climbing slowly, one hand pressed against his thigh for balance. No uniform, no medals, no locket strung like a trophy around his neck. Just an old work shirt washed to the color of bone, cuffs frayed, shoulders smaller than I remembered. He stopped a few feet away, squinting into the sunlight that caught in his gray hair. "You stand well," he said, voice hoarse but steady. There was no sneer, no audience to play to, just a simple truth, awkward and raw. I held his gaze. "So do you?" I answered softly. "You're learning." The words settled between us without weight, without anger, like smoke dispersing into sky. For once, he didn't argue. He just nodded. And in that nod, I saw what he couldn't quite say, that standing, for him, was no longer about commanding others, but about admitting his own faults, his own fear. We stayed there in silence, the good kind this time. He didn't reach for me, and I didn't move toward him. No embrace, no absolution, but the distance no longer felt like exile. It felt like space we were both allowed to claim. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me back. Chief Dana's voice crackled through the line, warm and urgent. A Type 1 assignment was forming for the northern districts. She wanted me as Deputy Incident Commander for the season. I said yes without hesitation. The word steady as bedrock. Sliding the phone away, I walked back to my pickup parked under a crooked piñon tree. The cab smelled faintly of dust and pine resin. On the dashboard lay the day's wind chart, creased from use, arrows pointing the direction fire might run if it started. I set my hand on it, felt the paper shift in the breeze. I breathed out slowly. The air carried both ash and promise, and I understood it fully. Standing wasn't something you did once at a wedding, or even once in a lifetime. It was a choice made again and again, every day, in every fire, in every silence. The truth didn't need permission. Respect wasn't handed down by blood or stamped by a family name. It was earned each time you chose to rise when it would be easier to sit. And as I turned the key, the engine rumbling awake, I knew I'd keep standing, whether the world watched or not.